Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Generation 180's first national webinar for volunteer teams. Um, Thank you to those of you who are attending via webinar. I know some of you are just joining for the first time, or this may be an introduction for you to Generation 180, so thank you for joining. I'll just start with a couple of, and Tish Tablan, I'm the national organizer for Generation 180, and we have a great webinar lined up today. We have two presenters. We have Bill Greenleaf with Virginia Community Capital, and we have Sam Daly Harris from Civic Courage, and I'll let these wonderful gentlemen introduce themselves when they get to their section of the agenda. So we're going to kick it off with Bill Greenleaf. He has generously given some time to teach us about the basics of solar financing. So I will hand it over to Bill.
Great. Thank you, Tish, and hello everyone out there. It's delighted to be here this afternoon and share a little bit about solar financing. I'm with Virginia Community Capital, and I'm going to talk a little bit about VCC, but mostly talk about solar deployment and financing. I run the Clean Energy Lending Program at VCC, which we started 3 years ago. So first, just one slide about VCC. We're a nonprofit lender. We're what's called a community development financial institution, which means which is a designation we get from the United States Treasury Department. It means that 60% of the loans we make need to be in low or moderate income census tracts. We focus on affordable housing, small business lending, fresh food and healthy food lending, and then more recently, about 3 years ago, we started our solar lending and energy efficiency program. We are a Virginia-only statewide lender. And in 2017, we made close to $5 million in solar loans. That's about nine or 10 different solar projects across Virginia. So as some of you may or may not know, I'm just going to touch briefly on what's going on with solar deployment in Virginia before I go into financing. We, as you may know, that there's been some school districts that have put solar in Charlottesville's Albemarle County has entered into a solar PPA with a company. And more recently, Middlesex County in the eastern side of Virginia is entered into a power purchase agreement to put a 1 megawatt solar facility. Also on the college and hospital front, there are three or four universities that have deployed solar on the campus. And then the first hospital is the Carillion Clinic New River Valley Medical Center, which is south of Christiansburg. They put about a 1 megawatt solar farm on their property. On the commercial industrial, there's not as much going on there compared to the other sectors, but there is a manufacturing facility in central Virginia that put an 850 kilowatt solar array on their rooftop. And as probably most of you have heard or read in the newspaper, Amazon and Facebook and some other big corporate users, and as well as Dominion, have started to build what we call utility scale solar farms in Virginia. These are solar projects that are 20 megawatts or 5, 10, 20 megawatts. These are very large solar facilities. And there's been a fair amount of residential rooftop solar deployed also. Mostly, from what I can tell, mostly in the kind of Charlottesville, Stanton, Harrisonburg area, and a little bit in Northern Virginia and Fredericksburg, and Richmond's kind of has not been a leader in deploying solar. And lastly, I want to also touch, there's been two municipal utilities in Virginia that have deployed solar. The town of Bedford, which is south of Lynchburg, they entered into a contract for a 3 megawatt solar system, and then the City of Danville has their own municipal utility. They also did a 6-megawatt solar farm. So it's starting to spread across the state. I'd say 2016 was the beginning of kind of widespread adoption, but really with it growing substantially in 2017. And I want to touch briefly on the tax incentives. You may or may not have heard about these. There's a 30% federal investment tax credit. So whether you're a business or a homeowner, there's a 30% tax credit for solar. And then if you're a business, you can expense the entire cost of the solar system in the first year. But if you're a homeowner, then you cannot do that. That's just one distinction there. So those two tax incentives are pretty important drivers for businesses to consider investing in solar. They definitely help reduce the payback period. I'm going to touch now at a high level on some financing models. One is, like our bank, we make what's called traditional bank loans on solar. These are short-term loans, 5 to 10 years, where we'll finance 75 to 90% of the purchase price of the solar system. So, example, last year we made one of these loans to a winery, a retail store, and it was an office building, a printing company, a horse vet, just to give you an example of some of the businesses in Virginia that have reached out to us to get a bank loan. There's another type of financing that's been more widely used in the energy efficiency sector. That's energy performance contracting. And that's typically when you have a company that comes in and does a big overhaul of all your heating, cooling, lighting, and building automation control system. And it's mostly sold to local governments and school systems. Those projects are what's called, it's where the energy savings pays for the loan payments. So for the local government and the school system, they're cash flow neutral. I have not seen one of those used yet for solar, but it's a possibility. I just wanted to make you aware of that. That's a pretty commonly used method to finance energy efficiency, energy performance contracting. Next is another model called PACE, which is Property Assessed Clean Energy. It got started in Berkeley, California in 2009. It spread to about 30 states. We have a PACE program in Virginia. It's a loan program for renewable energy and energy efficiency. The loan is repaid on your real estate tax bill. It's kind of set up as a voluntary special assessment on the property. Therefore, these loans are long-term loans or 15 to 20-year loans. Banks make these loans. Our private lenders make these loans. But it requires each locality to set up their own PACE program. So each locality has to pass an ordinance. It's been a pretty popular program in states where it got started a few years ago. And Arlington County is the first county in Virginia to launch a PACE program. And other localities are looking to adopt it as well. It's a very kind of a complicated loan program, and I don't really have time in this webinar to go into the details, but just to know that it's a very attractive way to finance renewable energy projects for a building owner because he can get a long-term loan and get 100% financing. But it does require the local government to pass an ordinance and set up a PACE lending program. Next, I want to talk about the two ways that solar has been deployed in Virginia. The first is through a power purchase agreement, and the second is through the direct ownership model. And I want to talk about how those two methods get financed. So again, I'm going to touch on this material at a high level, and then if anybody wants to dive into it, we can do that, get details. You can ask those in questions. So first, a power purchase agreement. It is a contract between the electricity user or consumer and the owner of the solar system. So in this case, you have a third party that owns the solar facility, and he's selling the electrons to the building owner. So, for instance, Albemarle County Public Schools did a power purchase agreement. Third party owns the solar system on their rooftop of those schools, and they're selling the electrons. These are typically 15 to 20-year contracts. They are legal in only Dominion, Virginia Power service area as a pilot program, which is capped at 50 megawatts. So far, there's only been about 2 megawatts of solar deployed under the pilot PPA program so far. The power purchase agreement pilot does not allow for residential users to benefit from it. And you cannot do a power purchase agreement in an electric cooperative area. So if you're on, Central Virginia Electric Cooperative or Rappahannock Electric Cooperative, you're not able to legally enter into a power purchase agreement with a solar provider. There's a limited power purchase agreement availability in Appalachian Power Service Area, which is of Southwest Virginia. They passed a law last year allowing PPAs in the footprint of some colleges down there. But that's about it. For the utilities, it's a threat to their business model, so they're not really anxious to jump in to allow power purchase agreements because and so basically it's obvious instead of paying the utility for your electrons, you're paying a third party owner of the solar system, so the utility ends up losing revenue through a power purchase agreement. But they're pretty popular across the country. So the two primary benefits to an electricity user through a power purchase agreement, first is there's no upfront cost for the electricity user. You don't have to you don't have to borrow any money, you don't have to put any money down. All you're just purchasing electricity from a third party. So rather than writing that check to the utility company, you're writing it to the owner of the solar system. And probably more importantly, the second reason is if you're a nonprofit or local government, you cannot use the tax incentives. You don't have taxable income, and therefore you can't use the tax credit. So the power purchase agreement is a great way for local government or school system to realize the benefits of the tax incentives, but without actually being able to use them, because the owner of that solar system is going to be a for-profit company, and they are going to be able to use the tax incentives and therefore pass those savings, pass the benefit of those tax incentives on to you, the electricity purchaser. That's why in Virginia, you'll probably only see school systems and local governments use power purchase agreements because, one, they don't have to put any money down, no money up front, they don't have to borrow any money, and two, they get the electricity at a price that reflects the tax incentives that are available for a for-profit entity. So just want to kind of highlight the four parties involved in a power purchase agreement. You've got what's called the solar project developer. That's the owner of the solar system. They enter into a long-term contract with the electricity buyer, and that solar project developer has to finance that project. So he's going to do two things. He's going to find a tax credit equity investor. It's usually somebody that has a taxable income and they're looking to use the solar tax credits. So that tax credit equity investor is going to invest in that solar project to get the tax benefits. So he's going to put some cash into that cost to help finance the project. And then that solar project developer is going to have to also go to a bank and get some bank financing to help pay for the cost of that solar project that he wants to build. So we've made some loans at VCC to support power purchase agreements. I just want to kind of highlight how we look at these projects and how they get financed. Typically, we'll finance up to 60% of the project cost. And these are short-term loans, 5 or 7 year loans. And what we're really looking for is to make sure that the purchaser of the electricity is a long-term, financially stable enterprise. So, for instance, if we were to make a loan on the Albemarle County school system power purchase agreement, for us, that would be a very kind of a low risk loan because Albemarle County Schools has, is very financially stable and is not going to go anywhere. So it's a high likelihood that banks can get comfortable making these types of loans because usually the electricity user tends to be a pretty financially strong entity. Next, I'm going to talk about the kind of direct ownership model. So that's where you end up as a business or homeowner, just purchase the solar system. You can use the tax benefits. You're also responsible for the operations and maintenance costs of the solar system. And in this case, there are several ways or several banks that will offer financing for solar. So on the residential side, there's going to be there are national lenders that have residential solar loan programs. On the business side, there are local banks like Virginia Community Capital that will finance the project to the business, will loan up to 90% of the purchase price. These are typically 10-year loans. The interest rate depends how strong the borrower is, how strong their cash flow is, but interest rates can be from 5 and 5.5%. At our bank, we're looking for businesses that have been around for at least 7 years and have, been profitable the past few years and have enough cash flow from the business to, make the loan payments for the solar system. I believe that wraps up my presentation. Again, it was just a high-level overview, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, we'll start with a question here in the room first. John?
Bill, hi, this is John Haydock. Thank you for that overview. That was really helpful, and you referenced Albemarle County a couple of times, and so I had a couple of questions specific to that as kind of a case example. So Albemarle County is benefited from the PPA that they have, and they've also recognized the value of those rooftops and have a lot more roofs now available for a potential second round of a PPA. But they're trying to figure out whether or not they can access grants and or financing for direct ownership. You made a comment that it's unlikely that we'd see schools and such move forward with anything but a PPA. That seems to be my perception as well. I think they're hesitant to move forward with PPA because they didn't quite get the savings they were hoping because the Dominion rates didn't go up as much as they thought. What are your thoughts as it relates to a creative way to provide school systems with a way for direct ownership? Is it a hybrid approach of a PPA, but a window where they purchase during that window after a few years, or what are your thoughts?
So thanks for the question. Two thoughts. Number one, usually in these power purchase agreements, there's an option to purchase the solar system after year 5. And the reason for year 5 is that the tax credit equity investor needs to own the system for the first 5 years in order to preserve the tax credits he received.
Yep.
And the second is if they wanted just to purchase it outright, I mean, they're effectively not going to be able to use as a brand new system, they're not going to be able to use the tax credits. So they're kind of almost paying 30% more. So if it's $1 million, if the retail price is $1 million, well, a for-profit entity would get a $300,000 tax credit, and so their net cost would be $700,000. But the school system would end up with, the full $1 million cost. So it just makes the electricity that they're getting from it 30% more expensive.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Do we have any questions from those of you on the webinar? If you look on your control panel, you'll see a tab for questions. You can hit the triangle and expand and type in a question. If anyone has a question for Bill. Okay, or anyone else in the room have a question? Okay, great. Bill, I know your business or Virginia Community Capital focuses on small commercial loans. Do you have any additional thoughts or advice to share if people want to get solar for their local business or help our local businesses go solar? So I guess as a volunteer team, we're going to be active in our local community trying to help others learn about solar and share the value of going solar. So as volunteers or advocates, if they have a colleague or friend who has a local business, what advice would you share on convincing them or helping
Sure.
them
Well,
go?
one thought I have is, as you may be aware, there's been these Solarize or solar co-op programs that primarily been focused on residential users, but in order to get discounted pricing or better pricing, if you just walked in, called up a solar installer. So maybe that model could be used for businesses in like the community of Charlottesville. Maybe you had a few businesses interested, they could band together to get more competitive pricing.
Okay, thank you, Bill. And then we do have a couple of questions. I will, James Ramadan, I see you have a question. I'm gonna try to unmute you and you can ask Bill your question. Okay, so James, and then you also have to unmute yourself. Do we have you, James?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Bill, I just had a quick question. So you mentioned the two approaches. I just wanted to get your take on when you recommend one versus the other. What is your recommendation there?
So I can only speak from our experience at VCC is when it's a nonprofit, they've gone the power purchase agreement route, and when they're a for-profit business, they just end up purchasing it. But there is a size of this kind of a size threshold. So if it's a small system, maybe a $50 or $60 or $100,000 system, a power purchase agreement's probably not going to be too cost effective because of the legal fees to review legal documents. And you'll find that the solar project developers that do these power purchase agreements are only interested in the larger projects, the projects that are maybe $500,000 or more in cost. So that's another thing to think about. So if you're a small church, would be a great example of an organization that could benefit from a power purchase agreement because they don't have to put any money up front. You'll be hard to find in Virginia an entity that will enter into a solar project developer that will enter into a power purchase agreement with you because the economics just don't make sense. So there's a size threshold also.
Okay, thanks, Bill. And then we have another question from Nick. So Nick, I'm gonna unmute you. Okay, great. If you unmute yourself, you can ask Bill your question.
Yeah, hi, Bill. Regarding businesses, what's the threshold for maximum solar array?
That's a great question, Nick. So what I've seen happen is the solar installers in Virginia, they'll go and make a sales call on a small business, and they will look at the utility bills and they'll look at the size of the roof, and they'll kind of weave those two together to figure out, okay, how much solar can we get on the roof, and then what percentage of that, how much electricity will that generate, and how much will that reduce the electricity bill? And so we've seen some companies that we've financed just put as much solar on their roof as they could physically put on the roof.
Sure.
And that still may have only met 70 to 90% of their electricity demand.
Oh no.
The other factor is how much can you afford?
Yeah, I'm understanding that. I mean, from the finance side.
Sure. So we've financed up to 90% of the purchase price.
Regardless of the amount of kilowatts, correct?
Correct.
If it's 500 kilowatts because it's $10,000 a month, I'm just estimating here quickly, then if they, up to 90%, so if they put up 50 grand, you'll finance the rest if the criteria that you said, the credit criteria that you gave was met. 7 years, profitable, credit score of the owner. If it's a LLC, you still use the credit worthiness of the owner?
Yes, we do. And we look at the cash flow of the business as well as the financial resources of the owner of the business.
Of course. Well, isn't it to be understood if, if you don't pay your power bill, they shut your lights off and you're out of business, right?
Right.
And your AC. But isn't it factored in that obviously now you're going to be paying less, including the finance cost? There will be some savings then, just staying with the utility bill. And is that savings considered to in your approval equation? In other words,
it is. Yes, that's a great question. Typically, we do not factor in the energy savings. We want to assume the worst case scenario. So we just look at the business cash flow, assume no energy savings, and if they can pay the loan back just on existing cash flow, then we're really happy to make a loan. It's not that we don't believe the energy savings are going to show up. We have full confidence the solar is going to work. It's just we just assume the worst case scenario.
Typical financial guys, bean counters.
That's
hey,
right.
What if the sun goes out? Bummer. Then they're going to be back on the grid. Not going to work. Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you, Nick.
Bit of levity. But
thank you, Nick. Thank you. We'll take one more question.
Go ahead.
I see a question from Fred Young. And Fred, hold on, give me 1 second to unmute you. This is a great question for Bill. Bill was also the former executive director for the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council. So I think he'll be perfect to wrap up the discussion with an energy efficiency question. Go ahead, Fred, if you can unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted?
We can hear you loud and clear.
All right, wonderful. Yes, Bill, thanks so much. My big question is, I'm an energy efficiency guy, so I always believe we should reduce before we produce. So why isn't there more focus on reducing building energy demand before we try to cure it with the technology of renewable energy?
Fred, that's a great question. And it's a question that I've given a lot of thought about, because when I joined VCC 3 years ago, I joined to start their energy efficiency lending program. And I went out and marketed that, and no one, 3 years later, no one has asked for a loan for energy efficiency. And about 6 months into the job, I was getting requests for solar financing. So I quickly realized that everyone's interested in solar. So the short answer is, in Virginia, there's 4 or 5 solar companies, and all they do is they cold call businesses and homeowners and pitch a solar system to them. They don't talk about energy efficiency. It's a perplexing, because like you, I believe it's just much more. It's just cheaper to do energy efficiency first than to put solar, particularly in Virginia. So I will say this: there is one company, Segura Solar, in Charlottesville, on the residential side. They actually have a reduce program where they will, if you buy a solar system, they will do an energy efficiency overhaul of your house, insulation, air sealing, and duct sealing as part of the solar price. On the commercial side, I've yet to see any of those commercial contractors integrate any energy efficiency into their platform of what they're selling.
Yeah, I mean, it is ironic, because we could reduce the size of systems that we need to put on buildings very simply.
Yes.
Yeah, it is perplexing.
Great. Thank you so much for your question, Fred. Bill, we'll wrap it up here, and because we're at time. And thank you so much for generously sharing your expertise with us today. Do you have any parting thoughts or questions or comments for us?
No, I just thank everybody for your interest. And if you have any questions, if my email's still up there, you can email me directly or go through Tish. Thank you.
I will
Appreciate
make
the
sure to share
opportunity.
it. Thank you, Bill. And if you want to hang on and listen, you're welcome to. There you go. So you have Bill's
I
email.
gotta
I'll make
run. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Yeah, so after the webinar, there will be a recording available that we'll share, and then I can also remind you the email for Bill and Sam as well, who'll be our next speaker. Good question. That's a great reminder. I will make sure to get it from Bill. I'm positive he's happy to share that with us. Great. Well, that was awesome to get that background. And so especially for those of you on the call just joining us potentially for the first time, to give you a little bit of background, we are forming volunteer teams across the country. We just launched our Charlottesville team in November, and within a few weeks of forming our Charlottesville team, we were able to launch a local solar schools campaign to encourage our local school districts here to go solar. And within a few weeks, we were able to meet with the chair of the school board for the city of Charlottesville. We were able to meet with the chief operating officer and environmental manager for the county school district. And we're going to have 2 of our volunteers come up and share and update our grassroots victories from what we've been doing just in the past couple months. So, James, you asked that question in the chat. How does this relate to what volunteer teams are doing? So we're going to have them provide that update. But I just want to share a little bit of background that the reason we picked Bill as our first speaker was because in our 2 meetings with the city and county school districts, both expressed a clear interest in learning more about solar financing. So in our local context, there was certainly an interest and not a barrier of political will towards solar, but more of a need to understand more how to finance it. And so that's why we brought Bill on to help educate our volunteers to be able to speak, have a basic understanding of solar finance, to be able to feel more confident and knowledgeable when you talk to people in your community, whether it's a business owner or school district or a homeowner, or what are some of the options going solar. So hopefully that was helpful information from Bill. Great. So next I'm going to invite up Kara West, who was the lead contact for Charlottesville City Schools, and then after her, John Haydak, who's one of our lead contacts for the Albemarle County Public Schools. And they'll share what we've been doing on our Solar Schools campaign. Sorry, I'll let you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Kara West. I started on the Charlottesville Gen 180 volunteer team from the beginning. And it was funny to hear Tish say that it just formed in November. Maybe with the holidays in there, it seems already much longer. But yeah, so overall, we had a very quick response. In our first or second team meeting, we wrote letters to the school board chair, and I wrote mine by email and sent it, and the response was really quick, which was surprising to me. And I wasn't nervous about the idea about going to meet with the school board chair. It wasn't necessarily a meeting with an official. It was more like, wow, this is going fast, and what can I say beyond solar good, coal bad? I did not have, and still am working on gaining knowledge, subject matter knowledge in about solar. But the meeting went well. There were like 4 or 5 of us, and we have the luxury here in Charlottesville of having Tish on the ground with us, and we're sort of maybe the incubator, the first volunteer team. So we definitely had Tish as subject matter expert and 2 other members of our volunteer team who have more of the subject matter knowledge. So I was able to relax a little bit around that, and I showed up as a parent. I have kids in the city schools here, and I thought the first meeting went well. The chairman was open, receptive, and like Tish said, it was not immediately, but very quickly, the discussion went to, well, but how do we pay for it, and what does it mean financially? And from there, we got advice that approach other stakeholders in the conversation in sort of the way that we were doing, coming as ambassadors and with the intent to help, not to come and picket and demand solar, but to sort of start the discussion. And I think our refrain, or at least in my mind, was like, how do we help you remove obstacles to start this process of exploring solar on the city schools? And yeah, I mean, the biggest surprise to me was how quickly it happened and how open he was to meeting with us as volunteers. And yeah, that's what I have to say about it so far.
Great. Anyone have any questions for Kara before we share what we were doing in Albemarle County? Okay, thanks. We'll have John come up next.
Hi, so John Haydock, and similar to the Charlottesville City effort, for Albemarle, we also started with a letter writing campaign. I'll just echo one or two things that Kara mentioned in terms of personal letters for several of us who have children in the school system, referencing that. And also, I think just from a tone standpoint, I think the letters that Gen 180 and the group helped craft were as much informational, seeking informational in tone as they were declarative. And I think at this stage of the game, that's really important, because our approach has been one of trying to understand what the school systems know and what they're trying to do. And I think the situation for the city was quite a bit different from the county. So as Bill referenced during his discussion, Albemarle County was the first in the state, I believe, to do a large-scale power purchase agreement, and in fact has dedicated resource. And that's the woman that we were directed to after our letter writing campaign to the board chair. They have dedicated resource focused on energy compliance and what have you. So very knowledgeable. It was as much about us discovering what their plans were for upcoming programs. And in fact, they did have an energy efficiency program. Has it still not been announced yet? Because I still haven't seen anything.
May not be yet.
Yeah, it's a $7.5 million program on energy efficiency that has a payback period over, was it 5 years? 12 years, thank you. And I would classify Albemarle County as very sophisticated, informed us of the results that they've seen with their power purchase agreement. They weren't currently exploring another round of power purchase agreement because they've recognized the value of that real estate, but I think they're in a bit of a catch-22 now, where they'd love to have direct ownership of future solar on rooftop, but they don't get the tax advantage. So it seems to me as if the really practical route for them would be to consider another PPA and maybe even stagger multiple PPAs over time as the rates continue to go down and are much more favorable today than they were 3 or 4 years ago when they did their power purchase agreement. Just in terms of one or two thoughts around tone, and the meeting that we had, and there were 9 of us there, was, I'd say, very informal and casual is maybe a better description, in terms of the introductions at the beginning, people drawing connections to Lindsay Snoddy, the compliance manager, and to the chief operating officer, both informal introductions as the meeting started, as well as formal introductions around the table. And again, just reinforce this theme of seeking to find out more. The idea of us asking as many questions as declaring anything led to a very productive, I think, trusting relationship between the two parties. And I'd say that's pretty consistent with other meetings that I've had, whether it be at the federal level or the local level. I think it's even easier at the local level because that's where you live, and chances are there are some common connections there. So I think that's the main theme I wanted to.
That's great. Thank you. And I'll just check if anyone had any quick questions for John. Okay. I see maybe a comment from Peggy. Peggy, do you just want to share a quick comment about the link you just shared? I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yes, we did this program, at least 10 years ago, where the students had a Power Down Friday and began to measure our energy use over the weekends, and then asked the teachers to just turn off their computers and pay attention to how much energy they were using. And we very quickly began to save a lot of energy and money, which interested the school district, of course. And then we received a grant from the EPA for 2 years, and we had a student conservation corps which went out and did energy audits at local businesses and presented to the CEOs. We did a bank, a store, a restaurant, a variety in Westchester, Pennsylvania.
Great.
So, and a lot of the kids actually got scholarships in college. One had a president of a college call him. A few other schools have done the same thing around the country, especially up in Massachusetts. So it is kind of a peanut butter and jelly thing where, you know, you put solar on, but you also need to conserve your energy and pay attention to your behavior and how you use it. So it's a very successful program.
Thank you, Peggy. Well, great. I hope you'll consider joining our campaign and continuing to do some great work advancing energy efficiency and solar in schools in your area. And I'd be happy to share that link you put in the chat with the group after the meeting today.
Yeah, the EPA did take it down. It's not on the current website.
Oh, I see it's on the archive now.
In the archive. Just take note.
Okay. Yes, that is a valid point. Thank you, Peggy.
So spread it far and wide. The Green Schools also, the Green Building Council has also done some studies on it and published some material on efficiency programs with students in schools.
Great. Thanks, Peggy.
Sure.
Okay, so thank you for that. So I wanted to share some of our recent victories in Charlottesville as we start to roll out teams in New York and DC and Richmond and around the country. You know, we hope to see some similar successes as we move forward. One of the ways we will help, one of the tools we will use to help advance our campaign and communities throughout the country is by getting the issue more visible in the community. So I'm going to bring on next as our speaker is Sam Daly Harris, and he's going to do a training for us on how to write an effective letter to the editor. And Sam is quite an expert in grassroots organizing. He advises Generation 180, and I will let Sam take it from here. Hold on, Sam.
Sorry,
Can't hear you.
can you hear me right now?
Great. Yes, now I can.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. If you can get online right now, please do, because we'll do some online research in a moment. I want to start by saying how excited I am to talk with you. I coached Citizens Climate Lobby beginning 3 months before they were launched, and for the next 7 years. Last year, CCL volunteers had 3,500 letters to the editor published. I remember when they had 0 published. That's where Generation 180 teams are right now. So I'm really excited about what's possible for you and the 180 teams. Let me go over some steps to getting a letter to the editor published. Step 1, embrace the fact that the vision we share in accelerating a cultural shift in energy awareness and clean energy adoption, with a particular focus right now on solar schools, can be spread more widely in letters to the editor, and that you're just the right people to do it. So from this point onward, I might refer to letters to the editor as LTEs. Step 2, select a newspaper to write and find out what the newspaper requires for letters to the editor. I've already done that for the Daily Progress in Charlottesville and some other papers there. But if you want to do this for newspapers outside of Charlottesville, you would go online to find out what's required to submit an LTE. How many words are allowed? What email address is used to submit your letter, or is the letter submitted right on the website? What else do they require? Like your name, address, and daytime phone number. Usually, you can Google the name of the newspaper you're going to write and the phrase letters to the editor submission criteria to get what you need. And that's your first online research. I Googled the Daily Progress, and I'll share what I found in a moment, but I'm going to ask you to Google another paper. So you might pick the Richmond Times-Dispatch, or for those outside of Virginia, whatever your local paper might be, large or small. So go online right now and Google the name of the paper. I'll call on someone in a moment, and the phrase letters to the editor submission criteria, and see what they require. While you're doing that, I'm going to share what I found when I Googled the Daily Progress letters to the editor submission criteria. So if you would Google some other paper, if you're out of Charlottesville, here's some of what I found. The Daily Progress welcomes letters of opinion on topics of public concern. Limited for submitted letters is 350 words. Letters must contain the author's name, address, signature if it's a hard copy letter, where you live, and day and evening phone numbers. Letters should be the original work of the signatory. Please send letters, and then they give a mailing address and how to do it online. But by email, you send letters at dailyprogress.com. That's letters at dailyprogress.com. So has anyone found the criteria for another newspaper? If you have, go to the question box, let Natalie know you want to speak, and she'll unmute you, so you might have to also unmute yourself. So Natalie or Tish, do we have anyone who's found the letters criteria for their paper?
So we're waiting. So if anyone who's online wants to share, if they found something, or if anyone here in the room checked a different paper that wasn't the Daily Progress. Sophia.
So I looked up the Richmond Times Dispatch, and they basically require all your contact info, your address, your name, your city, but they don't state any sort of requirements for word length or anything. You just maybe write it up in a Word document and copy and paste it into a little box.
Right, but do they say 200 words or 300 words or anything like that?
I couldn't find any word length requirements now.
Okay, I'm really surprised. To be honest, what I would do is then go check some of the lengths of some of the letters they published and keep it within that range. Seville Weekly, they give you 400 words, and they ask that you send it to editor at c-ville.com. So that's editor at c-ville.com with the word letter in the subject line, and you get up to 400 words. The next step is to go on. So this is the next step. Go online and read a few headlines from the front page and editorial page, looking for an article or editorial that might be a good angle for your letter to the editor on solar schools. Typically, you'll want to respond to a piece that's been published in the last 24 hours. Please go online and see if you can find an article or editorial that would be a good angle for a letter on solar schools. Just go ahead right now. Now, I've already found several, and I'm not going to give it all away right off. But so you'll go to your newspaper's website, or if you have a hard copy in your hand, and just look for an article that would be a good angle for a letter on solar schools. And we'll call on someone in a moment. Now, I'm going to start with one I found this morning in the Daily Progress in Charlottesville. The headline was Sustainability Front and Center in UVA Historic Renovations. I'm going to read you a couple of sentences from the article. Carr's Hill is the latest historic building to be overhauled as the university tries to update and preserve historic sites while reducing its carbon footprint. Great angle for a letter to the editor. Another part is UVA and College of Wise, eco-friendly materials, UVA and the College of Wise currently have 38 LEED certified buildings recognized for sustainability, water and energy efficiency, eco-friendly materials, and innovations. In 2006, UVA created a goal for all future renovation projects to be LEED certified. Now, I'm going to tell you how my letter to the editor might start from that article. To the editor, I was quite encouraged to read about sustainability efforts at UVA. And then I give the title, quote, Sustainability Front and Center in UVA Historic Renovations, end of quote. I also put in parentheses, the daily progress, January 28, 2018, end of paren. I was similarly encouraged by a meeting with, or by reports of a meeting with, Albemarle County school officials and their efforts to expand the number of solar schools in the county. So that was me finding an article that would be a good angle to write a letter to the editor where I could raise the solar schools issue. Could someone else give me an article you might have found that would be a good angle for a letter to the editor on solar schools? And Tish and Natalie, I'm going to ask you if you've got any indication that someone's found something. It's fine if you haven't. I've not given you much time, but I really want to get this muscle going of finding an article that would be a good angle. Sometimes it's a little bit of a stretch, but it's a muscle that we want to practice. Natalie, do we have anything? Tish, anyone?
Nothing yet in the question
Great.
box. How about in the room? I think people are still searching on their phones.
Here's the deal. Keep looking, and here's what I found in Seville Weekly, which allows 400 words. The article was Know Your Neighbor's Take on a Whole Different Meaning in Co-Housing, and it's about co-housing. It's like a multitude of America's top trends. This one started abroad. Well, another trend is solar schools. And later in the article, it says, the 50-year-old co-houser and president of the Co-Housing Association of the U.S. is using his experience at Shadow Lake to model a 6-acre neighborhood in Crozet called Emerson Commons, where 26 residences will encircle a car-free community with parking on the outskirts. One more sentence later, it says, each home will have solar panels installed on its roof. So that was another obvious, sometimes they're not that obvious, example of how I could use that article for a letter in Seville Weekly on the meetings with the school officials and the Solar School Initiative. Let me ask one more time, and then we're going to move on. If anyone has seen an article that might be a good angle for a letter to the editor on solar schools. Does anyone have something? Well, let's move on. I think you're getting the idea. The next step, so you found how many words and how do you send it, and now you found an article that would be a good angle for a letter to the editor on solar schools. The next step is to read a few letters to the editor in the newspaper to see how they're started and the general tone. So see how other people who got their letters published, how did they start their letters and what was the general tone of those letters? Then write your letter using the guidelines the newspaper provided. Share what values or experiences move you to work to expand the number of solar schools in our area. Refer to the information in the action sheet. And Tish, maybe you can tell people in a moment if they don't have the action sheet, how you sent it or where they could get it. If you're writing Charlottesville papers, thank the officials we met with recently and urge community members to support their work to expand solar in our schools. If you're writing papers outside of Charlottesville, raise the importance of solar schools nationally and urge readers to join the movement and use some of the national info from the action sheet. And last is you can urge readers to get involved in Generation 180 in your letter. So if your letter's, and this is the end, and we'll take a couple of quick questions. If your letter's published, celebrate, do a little dance, share it with Tish and the others in the office, share it on social media, share it with elected officials, especially school board members. If it's not published, celebrate that you took the action and maybe try a smaller newspaper. Eventually, you'll have a letter published, but only if you take the action. On our next call, we'll see if anyone's had a letter published. So, Tish, do you want to take one moment for any questions someone might have? My prayer is that you'll stay after the call and write your letter. Look a little harder for the criteria for your paper, or look a little more for an article and study some letters to the editor, and then write and send your letter to the editor. Tish, you want to see if there's one question or two?
I did get one person online, Katie and Drew. They found an article, so I'd love to just share that so we can just get more practice in, how we would, what angle you would take based on a given article.
Yeah, Katie and Drew, could you tell us what city you're in?
Sure. We're in New York, and we actually looked up the requirements for the Wall Street Journal because they tend to be, as Drew put it, a bit tone deaf when it comes to renewable energy information and dissemination of that information. And since this past election, they've been a much more aggressive newspaper about posting op-eds that are sort of at odds with one another in terms of opinions and, once again, information shared. So they had a requirement of 400 to 1,000 words and somebody that you can submit to. And a couple days ago, they published an article titled "The 3 Stumbling Blocks to a Solar-Powered Nation." So I think it would be a bit of a long shot, but a good opportunity to sort of edge in with the value of solar schools and why that could overcome some of these stumbling blocks that they highlight.
Okay, great. Let me make this one distinction and hand it back over to Tish. That was fabulous, what you looked at. Now, we've been particularly talking about letters to the editor, which
Right.
Letters to the editor are great responses to an article or an editorial. An op-ed, which you just mentioned, I think you
Right,
said.
they're both the same submission lines. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, and so that's 400 to 1,000 words, which is a bigger piece. And you don't have to necessarily refer to a particular article with an op-ed, but just what's been in the news generally, not a specific article. But brilliant, brilliant work. So Tish, I'm going to hand it back over to you. I'm really excited to hear what happens next month with these letters to the editor. I predict 1 or more will be published if we write them and send them. And I predict 0 if we don't write them and we don't send them. And I can't wait to hear what happens. Congratulations.
All right. Thank you so much, Sam. I really appreciate your help and your sharing your expertise with us. Thanks so much, Sam. And then so we'll wrap up the webinar. So I just have a couple of closing comments. So Sam alluded to the format for our meetings is that we do this webinar that volunteer teams will listen in. And then after we sign off in the webinar, the teams that are together will actually do the action for the month. So today, the action for the month is obviously writing a letter to the editor. So once we sign off, that's what our local team here in Charlottesville will be working on. So we'll be breaking up our group and assigning some local and regional papers and even a national paper to work on and have different people actually go ahead and find an article or a current event to comment on and submit a letter. And so, it just gives us good practice. So it gives us an opportunity now to try to find a hook to either write about advancing clean energy or advancing our solar schools campaign, and then kind of keeping that practice of when you do see a pertinent article, you feel more confident that you can go ahead and submit another one in the future. So this will, again, be a tool that we try to use with our volunteer teams to really get more visibility for our issue and to advance our cause. And I want to make another reminder of one thing Sam shared is if it does get published, make sure you share it, particularly with our local officials. So in our case, if we are able to get it shared, and we can hopefully squeeze in a thank you to the officials we come in that we met with, send it to them. I actually had an article published about our solar schools work in solar power world, and my quote included my mention of the solar that's gone up locally here in Charlottesville, and I certainly made sure to forward it to all of the people that we met with, the superintendent, the chair of the school board, and other school board members, just so they know we are really their ally, supporting them, giving them positive press about what they're already doing, and at the same time encouraging them to do more. So that's a great reminder. If you do get some positive press, make sure you share it. And thank you everyone for listening in. We're going to end the webinar, and right before, just to close out, I'll just share kind of one short quote just as a reminder of what we're working on. And this is a favorite quote of our founder, Sandy Reisky, who's a clean energy entrepreneur. And this quote is from Bobby Kennedy. And Bobby Kennedy said, "Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy, and daring those ripples to build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance." So that's really what we're trying to do as Generation 180. We're trying to create ripples of hope in Charlottesville, New York, and DC, and around the country. And we're trying to build a current towards clean energy that can sweep down mighty walls of the fossil fuel industry, pollution, and climate change. So we hope you consider joining us and helping us spread the word of Generation 180 where you are. So thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.